So you're going to see a circle on this page, but it's only because, or on this paper, but it's only because I am reusing this paper. I originally started a different project, so that's going to be painted over. Pay no mind to that. What I'm going to do is first take my ruler and draw a horizon line, just a little above the middle of the page. Draw that straight across. And then with a wash brush or a flat brush, whichever you feel like, wet the bottom half of that horizon line. Using that same flat brush, I'm going to take a little bit of turquoise green by Sennelier, which is a beautiful soft blue-green color, and I am going to add a very light layer right underneath the horizon line. So every part that is wet, just a nice soft layer of your lightest color. I am going to allow that layer to fully dry before moving on to the next part. With my pencil, I'm going to add a couple of wavy lines along the bottom half, so along the water, under the horizon lines. They don't have to be in any particular order, just try not to make them too dark, light enough for you to be able to see them. Because since we will be using a couple of lighter shades of blue, some of the pencil lines may show through. So go ahead and put in as many waves as you'd like along the lower half mostly. We are going to attempt to leave the part that's closer to the horizon line a little lighter with not as many waves showing through. Once I am satisfied with the amount of lines that I have along my paper, I am going to use a softer brush for this one. So I'm going to use the silver black velvet brush, and I'm going to take a bit of ultramarine blue mixed with just the teeniest bit of peacock blue, and I'm going to follow some of those lines along the bottom of the page. Now you're going to see that I'm going to be alternating between blues, so I really do suggest that you follow suit, that you also do this. Next, on the other line, on the other side of the page, I'm going to take a mixture of peacock blue and turquoise green by Sennelier, and I am going to follow that line and go right underneath the initial blue that I painted. So I'm going to continue doing this. As I move up the page, I'm going to be alternating between blues. One thing you will notice is that when I use the darker blue, I usually use it at the very top. So where I initially put my line, so that's going to be like the top of the wave. And then I move on to a lighter blue underneath. So in simpler terms, we are going to be alternating between dark and light to show some differentiation, to show where the waves begin and end. So the top of your waves mostly should be um, darker. If not, just make sure you put a darker line between two light ones. Once I am satisfied with the placement of the colors, what I'm going to do is go back to my flat brush that I was using in the very beginning, and with just plain water, I'm going to lightly run it over the top of the paper. Over the top of what you just painted. And I am doing this to blend the edges of the colors, but also to make it all seem a little bit more uniform and a little bit more smooth. As you can see here, I didn't apply too much pressure. I just did it lightly over the top so that I don't completely blend out my colors. Once that's done, while the paper is still wet, I am going to use another flat brush. This one is just a little bit smaller. You can use a round brush for this if you don't have a flat brush. The only reason that I really picked this flat brush was because I can use the very tip of it to make cleaner lines. If I use the round brush, you're going to see a lot of the paint moving around the paper. So in smooth, long swipes, use the very tip of the brush to add a darker blue in some parts. So you're going to see here that I'm using long fluid motions, and the reason that we use the long fluid motions is because the minute you pick up the brush deposits a little pool of paint when you go to pick up your brush. And when that happens, that paint spreads. So in order to avoid the paint spreading too much, do long, smooth strokes across your paper. You can also avoid pools of paint by not putting too much water on your paper, on your brush. So put more paint than water on your brush. You don't want it too water heavy because you don't want big pools of paint on there. So I am using Anthraquinone Blue with the very tip of my brush, and I am just adding in a couple of waves where the darker areas are underneath. As you can see, I've added a lot more paint, a lot more of the darker Anthraquinone Blue along the bottom, and I'm going in very sparingly and very sporadically as I get closer to the horizon. I'm just adding in a couple of very, very, very thin stripes, a couple of squiggles here and there along the top, just to show the hint of a wave, just the very hint of a wave. But we don't want to go too overboard with it. We want the majority of that dark paint to be at the bottom, and this is going to give us a little bit of a perspective view. So the smaller, thinner waves that you can see far into the background, they're receding into the paper, and your view is specifically from the front, where you can see the dark crests of the waves. By the time that you're done with the waves, the top of your paper or nearer to the horizon lines should be dry. If it's not dry, make sure that you dry it before moving on to this step. So the next thing that's we're going to do is wet the top half of the paper, so where the sky is going to be. We want to make sure that's nice and wet because we are now going to be painting the sky. I'm going to take some of the turquoise green that I used as an underpainting for the water, and I am going to apply a little bit of a higher saturation to the sky. I am also mixing in a tiny bit of peacock blue by Magello Mission Gold, and I'm going to completely cover that sky. As you can see, it's not extremely light, but it's not dark either. You just want a nice semi-light tone. On top of that, I'm going to add a very light layer of ultramarine blue, just to give the sky a little bit more dimension. I am going to dry my paper, make sure that it's completely dry before we move on to the next step. Using the same flat brush, I'm going to add a little bit of bright clear violet, just the tiniest hint. We don't want too much of that color here, but I just want to give the sky a little bit of color. So I'm going to add it right along the horizon line, and I am going to actually let it overlap the horizon line. So we're going to get a little bit of that violet into the water. Then I am going to go in with plain water and blend that up into the sky and then blend it down into the water. And the reason we're blending it down into the water is so that we don't have any hard water lines on the lower portion of our painting. Now I am going to go back into a round brush. This time I'm using a regular synthetic brush, not one of the imitation squirrel brushes. And I'm going to add a bit of opera pink, or basically a bright pink, right along the horizon line, concentrating as much of it as possible right in the middle of the page. So take that pink and blend it up into the sky. As you can see, I'm just adding in a couple of strokes in the sky, and I'm also mimicking that same technique in the water. So I'm adding a couple of strokes in the water. The paper is still wet, so it will basically blend on its own. So add a couple of strokes, a couple of lines here and there, and don't fuss with it too much. It will blend on its own. When you are satisfied with that, allow your paper to completely dry before moving on to the next step. Switching to a smaller round brush, this one is a size 6, I'm going to take the tiniest dot of Copic Opaque White and add it to the center of the horizon line. Once I have added that dot in, I am going to clean my brush off, and with just plain water, I am going to spread the white around the paper. After that, I am going to take a paper towel. You can see here I made a little mistake, but I'm going back to fix it. I'm going to take a paper towel and just blot out that white area. So it's going to not only mix the white in, but it's also going to dry your paper a little bit. And we're going to add a little burst right in the middle of that. So I'm going to take the smallest brush that I have, which is a liner brush, and I'm going to use the very tip of it to drag some of the Copic Opaque White up and down. So I'm not refilling my brush too much. I'm not dipping it too much back into the white because I don't want this to be very stark. If it is stark, we will fix it at the end, because of course I don't want it to be stark, but it ends up being stark, such as what you see here. But we just want a nice soft line. But again, we will fix that at the end. So for now, we are just going to add our bursts. You can add as many or as little as you want. Sometimes I go a little bit overboard, which I did in this page or in this painting. But again, feel free to add, a cross and a star in the middle, however many lines you want to add. Okay, now that I am done going overboard, what I'm going to do is take a bit of water. So we're going to begin softening this piece, this part of the piece up. So I'm going to take a little bit of water, spread it in the middle, and then take a paper towel and blot that water off. So doing so, it's going to soften the middle. It's going to remove some of the white. It's going to remove some of the paint. With that same small brush, I'm going to make sure that it is completely clean. So I am going to clean it off in the water, roll it on my paper towel. So it's just going to be a little tiny bit damp, and I'm going to go over all of the lines. So this is going to remove some of the white. It's also going to spread out the white a little to make it a little bit more glowy. So continue doing that as many times as you like to make it as soft as you like, and also to lighten it as much as you would like. So if you keep doing this over and over, eventually the white that you painted will be gone, but also it will eliminate some of the paint underneath. So I'm not going to do that in this piece, but you can continue trying to soften and soften, and you're going to be left with a glow underneath the white and underneath the paint. So there you go. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. I am so sorry for the lateness, and I will see you in the next one.